This is Hannibal here from thehannibaltv.com, and tonight we have a very special UFO and paranormal related interview with an author of over 20 UFO and paranormal books. He's been investigating the subject since 1986 and is just a wealth of knowledge. He's also a member of MUFON, none other than Preston Dennett. How are you tonight, sir?
I'm doing great, doing very well. How are you?
Good. We're back in lockdown here in Ontario, Canada, so we're just fighting through that.
Yeah, crazy world these days. What are you going to do?
Yeah, just go along with it, I guess. The big news over the summer with UFOs was the Pentagon UFO report. There hasn't been too much news coming out since then, but first to start that off, what was your opinion on that UFO report that came out? Was it more than you expected? Was it less than you expected? And do you think there'll be much more coming forward in the near future from the Pentagon?
Yeah, I don't think we've seen the last of it. It was pretty much what I expected. I had high hopes that maybe they would go a little bit farther than they did and say release some really good photographs, perhaps some metal. They did talk about having material from otherworldly vehicles, but kind of backpedaled that a little bit. But on the other hand, I was very pleased to see them hear them actually use the word extraterrestrial, which they have never done. It's always been no, UFOs aren't real. There's nothing to it. They're hoaxes, hallucinations, and misperceptions, and that's it. And they didn't do that this time. They actually considered the possibility. I think they examined 144 reports or so and said that they couldn't identify most of them. They didn't really say they're extraterrestrial, but they left open the possibility. So I think for those of us who've been in this field for a while, it was a big letdown. But for the general public who have never really been introduced to this phenomena, I think this was huge. This really brought the UFOs into the mainstream.
For sure. Now, what's your opinion from all the research you've been doing over the years on UFOs about what's exactly going on? Because you're also an expert on the unidentified submerged objects underwater too, which, from what I understand, are pretty much the same thing, anyways, because they're trans medium objects. But what do you think's going on? If you could sum it up for us.
Yeah, I think we are being visited by extraterrestrials. And I mean that in the classic sense, people like us, but from other planets. I think it's been going on probably for millennia, thousands of years before prehistory. I mean, we pretty much know this because of petroglyphs and stone carvings, Middle Age wood carvings. I mean, the Romans called them flying shields. We know they've been around forever. But there does seem to be a real escalation of activity starting since really the atomic age, 1940s, late 1940s. And starting then, encounters and sightings have really escalated. I think a lot of people are being taken on board these craft, physically examined. I think we're moving towards open official contact. I really do. I think at one point, everyone on this planet is going to know that we are not alone in this universe, that we are being visited. And it's not going to be a mystery. This is going to be something that is taught in schools. It's going to be something that's normal. And I think there's a really good potential for that happening very soon.
Now, how many different types of visitors do you think are coming here?
It's clear there's many different types. I would say most often I hear about grays, or what we would think of as grays. It's very well known in the media, but for those who haven't heard of them, they're 3 to 5 feet tall, large bald heads, dark almond eyes, whitish skin, grayish skin, small features in terms of nose and mouth and ears. That's the most common type, that certainly in my own files, and I think that's borne out by other researchers as well. But there are many types. Another very common type would be praying mantis humanoids. They look very much like praying mantis insects. And I know how that sounds to someone who might be skeptic, but these are the reports we're getting. And they're described as about 6 to 9 feet tall, very slender, long, thin limbs, huge eyes, and usually grayish to brown to green in color. Another very common category would be just human looking, beings that look very much like us, though perhaps their eyes are larger. Not a whole lot larger, they're very much like us, but really strange humanoids of all types. I would say there's a good 25, 30% are just beings that are uniquely described. Anything from, an 8-foot tall humanoid with large eyes to a 9-foot tall humanoid with orange straw-like hair to short dwarf-like beings, light beings, all kinds of different types of humanoids. But it's almost always, almost without exception, really, some type of humanoid. But then I mean arms and legs and head and eyes and so forth. It's very much like Star Trek. I will say that Star Trek got it pretty close to accurate.
Just with all the different types. And what about the intentions of the various types? You mentioned the abductions. Is that all the types doing the abductions? I hear it a lot with the Greys, but it seems like some of them might just be getting energy or something from the Earth. Some might have bases here and be refueling. Like, what would be some of the reasons these visitors would be coming would be to do?
Yeah, I think there's probably multiple reasons, multiple agendas. I think some are coming purely as tourists, just to check out us Earthlings. I think some are on scientific missions to just study our planet and the life on it. It's clear that some are coming to take materials. We have many, many reports of UFOs landing and taking samples of plants, animals. There are many reports of UFOs hovering over mines. For example, Arizona is the leading producer of copper in the United States. A lot of copper mines there, and there are many, many reports of UFOs over our copper mines. But really, it's all different mines, iron mines. There's a very famous case in Karnes City, Texas, where UFOs hovered over a uranium mine. So it's clear in some cases they are taking our resources. I think with the Greys, they have multiple agendas. Uh, they are trying very hard to enlighten people. People who are taken on board are physically examined. They're sometimes healed. That is not uncommon. But the most common message by far, and this is actually true for all different types of ETs, is being given warnings of some kind. And that usually falls under a couple of categories. Environment, they're very concerned about how we're treating our environment, how we're polluting it, and chopping down the forests, and this sort of thing. They're very, very concerned about our use of nuclear materials and nuclear weapons. There's a very famous case in 1967 over Malmstrom Air Force Base where they came down and basically shut down more than or up to 20 intercontinental ballistic missiles, nuclear missiles. I actually talked to a firsthand witness, and I think that's a clear message of their concern over our use of nuclear power. There's a lot of cases like that. They're very concerned about our warlike ways. One lady I interviewed from Maine, the Greys told her flat out, you need to stop putting out the greed and negativity you're putting out, or you will destroy your planet like we did. So that is absolutely one of their agendas. Another agenda is to reinvigorate their DNA. Some of the Greys have trouble reproducing and have been basically taking human DNA and creating what we would call hybrid babies. And I know that must sound to a skeptic, but again, this is something that is quite commonly reported. I hear it over and over again. I heard it way back in the late 1980s when I entered this field. So that's absolutely one of the gray agendas. Another would be to wake us up to our own psychic abilities, what you might call superhuman powers. I don't think they're superhuman. I think they're not even supernatural, they're natural. We have the ability to do telepathy. We have the ability to do astral travel, go out of body, to do healing, this sort of thing. They're very, very interested in sort of igniting that ability in people and teaching people how to do that. That is something I hear regularly, especially with people who have regular contact. They come away from their experiences spiritually transformed and start talking about past lives, start having clairvoyance or precognition, or able to do Reiki or hands-on healing, channeling, this sort of thing. So I'd say those are the main agendas. I don't think they're here to take over or eat us for lunch. I don't find any really good compelling evidence of that. I'm not going to say they're all friendly, because some people do have negative encounters, and it can be quite scary for people. But if, having looked at this very objectively, I see no evidence that they are what I would call hostile.
There's a fan on here that wants to know if you are aware of any accounts from Manitoba, Canada. Of course, there's that Falcon Lake famous one that I've heard of, where the gentleman got burnt by the disc, from what I understand.
Yeah, I do know a gentleman by the name of Jim Schaefer, who's unfortunately passed away, but he lived in that area, not far from Falcon Lake, actually. And he's had encounters his whole life. And he told his doctors about it, because he would wake up with puncture marks and bruises. And once he has a lot of missing time, and they come for him during the night. And once he woke up, his foot was broken. He went to the doctor and explained. The doctor was absolutely convinced that something very unusual was happening to him. As a child, he woke up with his eyes severely inflamed, went to the doctor, and the doctors diagnosed him with, they thought he had been looking at a welder's torch, because he had like arc burns in his eyes. And he says, no, I didn't go anywhere near someone who was welding. I just woke up that way. But he did also have positive experiences. He was diagnosed with cancer and had a huge tumor on his neck, and it was due to be removed by the surgeons. And it was about 3 days or so, a week before surgery, that he had an experience. He had an orb come into his house. He actually photographed it as it went into his chest. And he fell asleep. He woke up the next morning and went to the bathroom, and his tumor was gone. It was absolutely just not there. And he went to the doctors, and he actually sent me his medical reports. So I know that this is a true case. I saw the medical reports myself, and the doctors could not find any trace of this tumor, no trace of his cancer. They did an operation anyway to remove the necrotic tissue, but they couldn't find any trace of the cancer that had been there. It was absolutely inexplicable. He told them what happened, and they didn't write down in the report, ETs healed this gentleman, but put something like spontaneous remission or unexplained healing. So, yeah, I've got a number of reports throughout Canada. There was one gentleman who had a very interesting encounter on Wasaga Beach, on the beach along on Lake Ontario, I believe it is. And he and his friends were taking a walk along the beach late at night, when suddenly he noticed his friends had stopped moving. They were not moving at all. They were frozen. And he's looking at them saying, "What's wrong? Why have you stopped walking?" And they did not respond. And he's looking around him, and he sees that nothing is moving. The leaves on the trees, nothing is moving at all. And that's when he noticed there were these figures down by the water's edge. and they looked quite strange, very tall, wearing black, shiny clothes. And he had some disorientation, missing time perhaps, because the next thing he knows, he's standing right in front of them. And he said these guys were not human. He said that they were probably about 10 feet tall. And this is a young man. He's very analytical, a businessman. And I said, "Are you sure 10 feet tall? That sounds pretty tall." And he's like, "Listen, I'm 6'3". These guys were almost twice my height. I had to look up at them, and they were not human. He said they were humanoid. They had very, very large eyes, more than twice the size of a normal person, with sort of gold green lined irises. He said their skin was extremely thick and wrinkly and not normal looking. They had huge, jagged teeth. And he said, "You can't be here." He was going to say, "What are you doing here?" This sort of thing, but that's what came out. He said, "You can't be here." And they said, "We can come and go as we want. Nothing can stop us." That really freaked him out. And next thing he knows, he's running back to his friends. And he completely forgot the incident until a week later when they were back at the same area on another vacation. This was during a little vacation. And he spontaneously remembered this whole incident. And he asked his friends about it. He says, "Do you remember that walk we took?" And they're like, "Yeah, I remember." He says, "Did you remember seeing anyone on the beach?" And they did. They said, "Oh, yeah, I remember that. There were those weird looking people and you ran up to them." But that's all they remembered. They did not think there was anything else unusual. And he did not want to say anything because he hadn't admitted to them that he was having UFO encounters. Prior to this, he had been trying to call UFOs down, and he really wanted to see one and see ETs face to face. And he got his wish, though it was not what he expected.
As far as the Canadian government's knowledge of UFOs, do you think they know anywhere near the amount that the US government might know?
Yeah, I think so. I talked to Paul Hellyer, who was the former defense minister of Canada, and he's the highest ranking government official really on record to have come forward and say that we are being visited by multiple ET races. And so he knows, and he's certainly in a position to know. Canada had Project Magnet, which was all about studying UFOs. I am sure that they know quite a bit. It's my understanding that at the highest levels of government, the major superpowers are cooperating on this subject. And we may have divisiveness and wars between the major superpowers. But with this subject, I believe we are cooperating and that everyone is sharing information. And yes, I think all our major governments are perfectly aware of what is going on. The recent Pentagon report, they said, "We're not sure what these are. These could be Russian, they could be Chinese, some advanced technology from a country here on Earth." In my opinion, it's my assessment, that's a flat out lie. They know exactly what this is. UFOs have been crashing for many years. We have, the Roswell crash is one of many different reports of UFOs that have been recovered by the military. They know exactly what this is. All the major governments do.
I see. Now, as far as the various alien races that might be visiting, do you think they have any type of agreements with each others? We've heard Paul Hellyer and some other officials, I believe one from Iran, saying, or maybe it was Jerusalem or Israel, that there's like a galactic federation of aliens. Do you know anything about this?
I'm certainly aware of the stories that are circulating in the UFO literature and the UFO community. I cannot say I have any firsthand information on that, or that even a single contactee that I've interviewed has said that there is a galactic federation or council or anything like that. Instead, what I hear is that these ETs are extremely telepathic. Everyone knows what everyone else is doing, and they're very much cooperative in their ventures. they don't have a government like we would think of it. There's no federalized system. There's no class distinction. There's no money. I've never heard a single report of ETs using money or anything like that. They don't have to deal with crime or divisiveness or anything like that, because you have to remember, this is a highly telepathic, very evolved race of beings. All these guys are very much not only technologically advanced, but spiritually advanced. So I don't believe they're at war with each other or in conflict. I think they're working in concert. And we see this when people are taken on board or they have contact. We see Greys working along with human-looking ETs, working along with praying mantis type ETs, working along with strange humanoids of all kinds, cat-like beings, short little dwarf-like beings, light beings. That was another category I didn't mention, but that does turn up quite a bit. Tall whites, looking very, very much like us, but much more slender, whiter skin, much larger eyes. But as near as I can tell, there is no galactic council. I don't want to rule it out because I don't know. This is still a very new field of study, but I haven't received any reports of it personally.
Now, you've mentioned the tall whites. I'm sure you've come across Charles Hall's stories about his alleged experiences in the Nevada desert with the tall whites. I'm wondering what your opinion is on those stories.
Yeah, I read his series of books, Millennial Hospitality. I found them quite compelling. I heard him speak. He seems very sincere. It's very hard to prove his case, but the stories that he's telling do match up with what other people are saying. So I think there is probably validity to his story. One thing I found very interesting is he said that these tall whites would occasionally walk among us in society, and in particular that they would occasionally visit casinos in Las Vegas. And I found that very interesting because there are actually a number of reports of people who have reported seeing what they believe are humanoid beings walking among us. I have a good half dozen cases of people seeing very strange figures in casinos, but really everywhere. I mean, gas stations, convenience stores, schoolyards, bus stops, you name it. People are seeing ETs in places you would never, ever expect. I think Charles Hall is probably legit. I can't say for sure. He does talk a lot about mathematics and science in the ends of some of his books. And that's another thing I find fascinating, because this is something we see from a lot of contactees who develop a really strong interest in science and astronomy and astrophysics and quantum physics and this sort of thing, which ties into what the ETs are trying to do, is to uplift people and raise their intelligence and raise their awareness and their consciousness. The Charles Hall is a very interesting series of events.
Yes, I've read the books as well, and they are interesting. Dale would like to know if you believe any alien species could be farming us.
I'm not sure I would use that word. I do find it fascinating because they are obsessed with us. I mean, they love all things human, all things Earth. And here's a case I think speaks towards that. A gentleman by the name of Jim from Gainesville, Florida, was being visited by Greys frequently throughout his life. He had overcome his fear of them, and one day they appeared around his bed. And he said, okay, if you're going to take me, why don't you fix my hernia, repair my hernia? And they said, we know of this condition that you speak, and we will repair it. And they did, using a little handheld instrument. And then he asked them, why are you taking me? Why do you keep visiting me and taking me? And they said, "We are interested in your genetic potential to live a long time." He found that interesting because his grandfather was 106 years old and still active and healthy. And I found that interesting because this is something I have heard from other people, that the ETs are interested in our longevity, and people receive what I would call health upgrades. John Mack talked about this. John Mack was a very prominent abduction researcher. People are essentially given a health upgrade and enjoy excellent health and live a very long life. There's a case from Artie Six Killer Clark, one of my favorite new researchers who's gone across the North America and South America interviewing indigenous peoples. And she interviewed a gentleman from South America who was a professional bike racer. He was taken on board and returned. He doesn't remember what happened. However, following his encounter, he started winning all his bike races. He said that the ETs made him stronger, much more healthy. And we see this in case after case. People have had their IQs tested, and it's gone off the charts following an encounter. I think they're upgrading our health. They're upgrading our species. They've been sort of genetically intervening and manipulating our species, I think, for a very long time. I mean, we have ancient writings that speak about this, from the Bible through Native American oral tradition. Indigenous cultures talk about how they believe the star people are their ancestors. So I think it's clear that our relationship to them is much closer, perhaps, than we realize. We are them, they are us. And they are sort of, throughout the millennia, sort of creating new versions of us over every successive generation. So I wouldn't call it farming, I would call it upgrading.
Have you been following Robert Bigelow's contest where he had that essay contest regarding the best essay to kind of hypothesize what happens after you pass away? And the guy that won $500,000.
Yeah. Yeah, I wish I had known about that. I found out about that when the results were announced. And I think it's an awesome idea to sort of throw some real research, some time and money at this subject to prove the subject of life after death. Because I think the evidence for it is absolutely outstanding. Robert Mishlove is the one who won the grand prize. There were several runner-ups, and I did not read his entire paper, but I did read a good portion of it, and it's quite impressive. And I think the evidence for life after death is outstanding, and it comes in many different forms. Of course, there's ghost reports, which stretch back hundreds of years. He didn't really cover that. He talked mostly about near-death experiences and some of the science that's been done on that. But out-of-body travelers, that's another really interesting aspect to this. Mediumship and channelers. There's many different sort of avenues to study life after death. And yeah, that's quite a prize, $500,000. Wow. I wish I had known. I would have definitely tried to put something together, because I'm fascinated by that subject of out-of-body experiences in particular, and near-death experiences. I think the evidence for life after death is very compelling.
Yeah, there seems to be a few different options of what can happen to you based on the evidence. Uh, what do you know? What would you say are the main things that could happen after you pass away?
I would say for most people, it's going to be just fine. And I think in like traditional religion, people talk about the heavenly realms. And I believe that is what happens. And this is certainly reflected in the reports we get from mediums and near-death experiencers, that when you pass away, you go through a tunnel of light, you have a life review, and you are taken to what we would call the other side, which is basically very much like Earth, but a higher vibration. It's much more beautiful. you have a astral body, and it does not age. You sort of revert to a younger version of yourself. And this is where people go when they pass away, for the most part. And there are higher realms beyond that. And it's quite a complicated subject to get into. I mean, we could talk about it for hours. But I think what does happen to some people, and that this is a real problem, is that people become earthbound. And by that, I mean people who are perhaps profoundly skeptical of life after death, or suffer a quick traumatic death, or people who are perhaps drug addicts, or have made the choice to perform evil acts such as murder, or people who are, for whatever reason, attached to Earth, will find themselves earthbound. There are many people who have passed away and do not know it. They become ghosts. And this is a real problem. And people who do astral travel are often sort of inducted into helping people cross over to the other side, because there's a lot of earthbound spirits here who do not know they've passed on, or who are afraid to travel to the other side for fear of judgment, or are just so hooked on drugs or alcohol, or some, perhaps they're lost in despair, have severe emotional problems that are preventing them from moving on. So that is something that is happening. And that's, I think, one of the main causes for all the ghost and haunting activity that we see throughout the world, and that has been going on for hundreds and really thousands of years.
Funky Fresh for Rhyme would like to know, what's your opinion on spirit boxes?
Yeah, I find them fascinating, and I think that there is some validity to them. People have been recording EVPs, electronic voice phenomena, for years. And it was clear that this sort of technology was going to be developed and enhanced. And spirit boxes is a good example of this. And the theory is that ghosts are able to communicate through these, because we know that they can affect electromagnetic instruments. There's many cases where ghosts will cause lights to go on and off, or for that matter, they can open and close doors and affect the physical world in a wide variety of ways. And a spirit box is sort of easy access to spirit communication. And there's been some really convincing research into this. I think it works. I think you have to be careful, because it's not always clear who you're communicating with and what exactly is going on behind it. I don't think we fully understand the mechanisms behind it, but I think it offers great potential for communicating with spirits and sort of bridging the gap between the veil between the physical world and the higher astral plane.
Now, this is a bit of a funny question, but I know sometimes it doesn't appear that they wear clothes. Dale would like to know, do ETs present themselves in the nude or clothed?
This is a great question, because often people will see these, particularly the grays, and assume that they're nude because it does not look like they're wearing clothes. And I have looked into this, and I am pretty sure that does not happen as often as people would think. I think what we're looking at are very much skin-tight fabric that would appear to be nude, but is not. Because what we don't see are normal anatomical features that would be present in someone's anatomy. And people who have been taken on board have seen ETs undressed, and they do report an anatomy very much like humans. So I think what we're dealing with is just really tight jumpsuits. But ETs do often appear in, silver jumpsuits, blue jumpsuits, green, olive green, metallic, and sometimes I think it's just tan, and it looks very much like skin. I can't completely rule it out that they are not wearing clothes, but honestly, I think they are.
I see. And as far as the various cases you've researched into abductions, which has been the most interesting one that you've looked into?
Oh, wow, that's a difficult question because there's a long list of them. I think one of the most fascinating cases I investigated involved a Navy medic by the name of Kevin Kamen. And he was stationed on a Navy ship, and his bunkmate, who was a personnel clerk, said that he was a contactee. I'll call him Lewis. And Kevin says, "Oh, really?" And Lewis said, "Yeah, I've been taken on board their craft since I was a little boy. Happens regularly. They've taken me to their planet and so forth." And Kevin said, "Well, if that's true, I'd like to meet your little green friends." And Lewis said, "Okay." And long story short, a couple of days later, this is while they're on the Navy ship, Lewis says, "Okay, I visited your house." He described Kevin's house in detail. And that really impressed Kevin. And he told Kevin, yes, the ETs have agreed to take you on board. They're going to come tomorrow. And the next day arrived. Lewis showed up in their bunk room and said, "Okay, go up on the deck. They're there waiting for you." Kevin's bunk room was pretty close to the deck. So it was just a few steps up onto the deck. And he got onto the deck, and there was this enormous sort of diamond-shaped craft covered with colored lights. He said it was huge. It was alongside the Navy ship and probably 3 times the size of the ship, which was 600 feet. There were many officers on deck. Kevin ran up to the mess cook and tried to get his attention and wasn't able to. And the next thing Kevin knows is he's pulled on board this UFO, and he's looking down and sees the Navy ship receding into the distance. It becomes a tiny little dot, and it's gone. Now, this is a long, drawn-out account, but I will say Kevin next found himself hovering over his hometown inside this UFO, and they showed him his father working at a bank building. They showed him his mother, where she taught at a school. They took him apparently back in time and showed him as a little boy. His grandmother was alive. His grandmother had passed away some years earlier. So this is how he knew there was some sort of time travel going on. And next thing he knows, they're flying over this cratered area. And he's looking at it and thinking, what is this? This is a bomb range. And they come over the rise there, and he can see Earth off in the distance. And that's when he realized they're hovering over the moon. And this totally freaked him out. And he was too afraid to look around and see what these ETs looked like, but started asking them questions. And they answered him telepathically in English with a male voice. He said, "Where are you from?" They showed him a star chart. He said, "Are you going to eat me?" And they said, "No, we don't eat people. We eat fruits and vegetables and fish." And they answered all his questions. He asked about Roswell. They said, "Roswell's real." They said they speak all different languages on our planet, that they've been watching us for a very long time. They said, since we started exploding nuclear bombs, we started a countdown clock. And because of that, there will be many disasters on your planet. And they showed him various hurricanes, tornadoes, and landslides, and so forth. I'm shortening this because this is really a long account. But finally, he turns around and looks at them and got a real shock. There was 3 praying mantis type ETs. They were bone white, very much pale white. And he says they were about 15 feet tall. And I'm like, "Kevin, are you sure?" He says, "I'm a trained observer. I'm a medic. I know what I'm talking about." He says, one of them took 2 steps and came right up next to me. And it was more than twice his height. He's 6 feet tall. And scared the living daylights out of him. And they said, "Do you want to go to our planet?" And he said, "No, take me home." He was really quite fearful at this point. And one of this figure reached down and touched his shoulder, and Kevin blacked out and woke up back on the Navy ship. So that was, in a nutshell, his encounter.
Do you think an abductee has ever been taken to a different planet?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I don't get a whole lot of reports of this, but it does turn up. I'm currently interviewing a lady from Florida, well, originally from Florida, and she reports this. And this is not unusual. I know another guy I interviewed. His name is Joe Gardner. The ETs have been taking him, and they took him to see the planet Saturn. That's something I have heard from a number of people, including this lady in Florida. But this lady from Florida, they took her to a complete other planet. She said it had very low gravity. The vegetation there was phantasmagorical, is how she put it, with trees that grow well over 5 times the height we see here on our planet, and all kinds of just strange vegetation, but very much like Earth. And this is the reports that I've certainly read about in other cases. This does happen. It's not super common. I think it's probably more common than we realize. It's just that a lot of people do have missing time involved with their encounters, and it comes back to them. Their memory comes back sometime later after they've been put back.
Casper actually wants to know, why do you think some experiencers experience the missing time element where others don't?
I think there's a couple of reasons for this. I think in some cases, the ETs do this on purpose to protect a person's psyche, because this can be a very traumatic event for people. And I think this is something that's done intentionally by the ETs. On the other hand, there are many reports of people saying that it's not the ETs who are doing it, it's us, and it's our own sort of psychological mechanism of denial, and that many people just do not want to remember. And if a person puts that thought out, the ETs will facilitate that. So it's not entirely clear to me why some people remember and some don't. I think a lot of it does have to do with the fear response. Someone is taken on board and suddenly find themselves surrounded by beings that do not look human. They can have a very strong fear response and may even react violently. And in those cases, people will be paralyzed, and often they will have missing time, and their memories are not erased, but will be suppressed until they are psychologically ready to be able to deal with them. But if a person does not have a strong fear response, that's when they get to remember. And there are many cases of people who have full on memory of what happens to them. This lady that I'm interviewing in Florida, she's the subject of my next book. Her encounters started out a little scary. She did have missing time, but age 14, she had a major encounter, and just when she wanted to remember, and she tried very hard and meditated and was able to get full recall of this encounter, which was very benevolent. And since then, she's remembers everything, well, most everything that happens to her. So I think it takes sort of an effort on the part of the witness to accept this and put forth the energy and the willpower to remember it. Another example would be Melinda Leslie. She's really well known in this field. I interviewed her as well for one of my books, and she had an encounter involving missing time, and she just sat down on her bed and kept still and meditated and thought back and recalled that she was in fact taken and remembered being pulled on board and had this whole physical examination. They gave her these various tests, gave her information. Her 2 friends were taken as well. One of her friends was told how to build a UFO detector, which is basically just putting 2 magnets next to each other. And if a UFO flies over, it disrupts the magnetic field and will set off the little alarm there. So I think there are various reasons why people's memories become a little sketchy when it comes to UFO encounters. It's partly the ETs doing it, but I'm leaning towards now thinking it's perhaps our own responsibility to remember. So I don't know. I'm still trying to figure that out, but definitely missing time is a problem. Some people remember and some don't.
Sophie would like to know if you could tell us more about the theory that there's alien bases in the ocean.
Yes, I think the evidence is growing that there are alien bases in the ocean, or at least parking lots. I think the ocean has got a lot more of UFOs or USOs, unidentified submersible objects, in them. I will say it's clear the ETs have been here a long time, and there's a new theory or a new term floating around called crypto terrestrials, meaning that perhaps some of these ETs are actually from Earth or were originally from Earth and are coming back, which is definitely a possibility. I'm not sure we have enough evidence really to say either way, but I do know that I've personally done a lot of research into USOs off the Southern California coast here, the Santa Catalina Channel, stretching from the Channel Islands on the north end down to San Clemente on the south end, and have documented more than 150 reports. And some of these involve large numbers of objects. I'm talking, 100, 200. So I'm not sure where all these objects are coming from, but it's a logical conclusion that there would be some kind of base down there. The ETs do have the technology to do this. And there are people who have been taken by the ETs and do not find themselves on board a craft, but instead find themselves in some kind of base. And it's in this area. So presumably this would be an undersea base. And the Southern California area is not the only place this is going on. There are USOs all across our planet. I've got a case in Lake Hamilton in Arkansas, which is not a huge lake, Lake Miccosukee in Florida. One of my favorite USO accounts involved a gentleman by the name of Ray Sachs, who was an electrician's mate on the USS Clamagore. This is a submarine that carried nuclear-tipped torpedoes. And in 1971, they were heading up the East Coast. This is at night. They were on the surface of the water, moving at about 12 knots, when a USO zoomed up from the stern at about 100 knots and paced the Clamagore for a good 15 minutes. This did not appear on sonar, but 4 people who were on the deck, including the commander, the second in command, and 2 watch officers, including Ray Sachs, the guy I interviewed, saw this. And it made no sound. It was quite large, paced the submarine for 15 minutes. Many of the major officers came up on deck to take a little look-see at it. And finally, it darts off at about 80 knots in another direction. And the second in command turns to the commander and says, "Sir, how would you like me to report this in the log?" This is according to Ray Sachs. And the commander says, "Officers who report this kind of event in the logs do not move up in rank." So apparently this was not recorded in any official capacity. And having talked to other Navy officers who I told this story to, and others who have reported other events, most of these USO events are not recorded. And we have a lot of them coming out now from various Navy officers. I think that's just the tip of the iceberg. So yeah, I do think there's bases. And I think our oceans are filled with these things because they have the technology to do it. And it's a great place for them to remain undetected and still have sort of quick access to humans and Earth to do the projects that they want to do.
Do you think aliens would have any issues with us trying to colonize Mars and now looking outside of our planet, exploring space?
Uh, Possibly. There is some, I'll even not use the word rumors, but some information that, the moon missions involved us being sort of told, no, you are not doing this, because we were planning on, exploding nuclear bombs on the moon, and we're basically warned off. This is still hearsay, so to speak, coming from whistleblowers. We don't have the firsthand information of this, but there are multiple reports of this, that ETs consider us a very violent species, and no, we are not allowed to go beyond our solar system. I'm not so sure colonizing Mars is going to be successful. Mars has no magnetic field, it's a dead planet, and the radiation out in space is lethal. So we will see if that moves forth. But just from a scientific viewpoint, I think there's a lot of problems with that. And from the ET vantage point, from what I'm hearing from contactees, no, we will not be allowed. And in fact, open official contact is being held back. And the main reason would be because of our divisiveness, our fear of other people who look different, and our warlike ways, and our aggression, and our inability to take care of our own planet. So I think until we grow up and start overcoming greed, corruption, the unequal distribution of wealth, and our war-like ways, we're going to be held back. That's my understanding. That's my assessment. I can't prove it, but that's the information I'm getting.
And what do you think about the theories that some of these times where there's been nuclear tests in space and nuclear tests in the ocean, that those weren't really actual tests at all, but the government was aware of alien craft being around in certain areas and wanted to try and blow them out of the areas? Did you ever hear about anything like that?
I can't say that I have any good firsthand information on that, or I've ever interviewed anyone about that. I know there are cases where we've apparently tried to shoot these things down. There was a case I know in Vietnam where they shot a missile at a UFO, and the UFO absorbed the missile and turned it around and shot it back. And I have a number of cases where people have shot at UFOs with handguns or shotguns, and nothing. I mean, they weren't able to affect the UFO, obviously, but in a few cases, people have been shot back at, beamed by a beam of light, and suffered burns or radiation sickness and this sort of thing. But I'm not aware of the government using nuclear weapons against ETs. That's not really something I've looked into, so I can't really speak to it with any authority. Wouldn't surprise me, knowing the stupidity of our own governments. They've bungled this whole UFO situation badly. They've been lying about it since day one. They're treating it as a threat. I think they know it's not a threat, even though they are putting forth an alien threat narrative. I think really the only threat is to their power structure. That's the alien threat. That if everyone here on Earth became aware of our own abilities of telepathy, if we became aware of that there is no need for the unequal distribution of wealth, if we became aware that we're basically being enslaved, and knew that there were a lot of other people out there in space who are very much like us, it would threaten the entire power structure of these one percenters who are sort of choking our planet with greed and corruption. I think that's the alien threat. And I think that's why they're so, I think that's the driving force behind the cover up. Greed, corruption, money, power.
Now, have you witnessed a UFO yourself or had any like very obvious paranormal experience in your life?
Yeah, I have actually. I've not growing up. I mean, I did have one sort of ESP type event when I was a little kid, where I knew all the answers to a game show, but I didn't really categorize that as psychic. I just thought, wow, that was odd. My sister will verify it. I ask her every couple of years if she remembers it, just to make sure she doesn't forget it. In 1984, my mother passed away. I was 19 years old, and I did see her spirit. And again, I didn't believe in ghosts at that time. I came into this field a complete skeptic of all things paranormal. But in 1986, found out that many people within my family, my coworkers, my friends were having dramatic encounters. Some had had missing time, taken on board, saw aliens face to face. So this hit home for me. That's how I became a researcher. And it wasn't enough for me to just interview people or read books on UFOs. I wanted to see them myself. So I was out there in the fields, looking for them. If someone said they saw a UFO, I was there. I'd be like, can I camp out at your house? I want to see this. And I did. I started to see anomalous lights mostly. And over the years, I have had a few really good encounters. Probably one of the best was when I was interviewing this lady, who I'll call Wendy. And she said she was in touch with ETs. And she had a lot of evidence to support her, supporting witnesses, medical evidence. And I said, well, if that's true, can you call them down? And she said she would ask them if they would do a demonstration for me. And they agreed. And this was in 1996 or so, 95. And she said, okay, they've agreed to come down at a certain location at a certain time. And this was in Pasadena, California, off the 210 freeway. And I went there with her and my sister-in-law and my nephew, 4 of us. And we got to the location. Well, just Wendy and I. My sister-in-law and my nephew were a couple of 100 yards behind us. This is just a little rural mountainous area right off the freeway. And this object came down, and it was right next to us. Wendy screamed, she points, and I turned around, and there it was, about 100 feet away, 50 feet away. It was close. It was an enormous sphere covered with golden lights, really beautiful, really striking. I mean, it was 20 feet off the ground, totally silent, as big as a house, and just hovering there. We were screaming. I mean, this thing was so big, so beautiful, and clearly unexplained. But it was there for maybe 10 seconds or so, maybe 20, before it started to slowly move away. And then it darted away like a bullet so fast. I mean, it must have been, it went all the way behind a mountain. So fast, it left a tracer of light. Looked like 1,000 miles per hour. I couldn't even begin to estimate, but many, many miles in a matter of seconds. That was one of the best sightings I had. And I've had other sightings with contactees since then.
And if people want to order your books or follow you on social media to find out more about your research, how can they do that?
I do have a website. If you punch in my name, it should take you there. It's prestondennett.weebly.com. And you can contact me through my website if you have a story or a question or some information you'd like to share. I always love hearing from people. My books are on Amazon and other online retailers. I'm on Twitter and Facebook. And I do have a new YouTube channel where I'm putting out my research. So yeah, this is an important subject. For any skeptics out there, I would say, if you don't believe in this, ask the people you love and know, your friends, your family, your coworkers. I think you'll get a real shock. This subject does affect you. You may not think it does, but it does. We have this technology, the military does, and we don't need fossil fuels. We don't need to be working for a living. There's enough food and money for everybody. We're going to be looking at a very different world if we can end this UFO cover-up. And it's ending. It's crumbling fast. And there's a very real potential for open official contact. So this is an important subject. That's the point I'd want to make. And yeah, I really appreciate you having me on the show. It's awesome.
Oh, no problem. And last question I'll ask you for tonight. It's come up a few times. What's your opinion on the connection of UFOs in the Bible? Some people have the theory that people were believing that flying chariots were actually UFOs, and lightning was really like lasers from UFOs and so forth.
Yeah, I have looked into this. I'm not an expert by any means, because there are people who know the Bible much better than I do and have written. There are scores of books on this. It's clear that some of the events that are described in the Bible, such as the wheels of Ezekiel, may very well have been UFO events. Another thing that people point to is the Book of Enoch, which was edited from the Bible, or at least some versions of it. Yeah, I think some of the descriptions of what we would think of as angels, certainly one contactee I interviewed was told that by the ETs. They told her flat out, who you thought were angels was us. So yes, I think probably there is some truth to that. Again, I'm not an expert in the Bible, but just, from what I've been able to read and research and talking to contactees, yeah, I think there's absolutely a connection there for sure.
Very interesting. Well, thanks again for joining us. We hope to have you on again someday, and I'll let you close this off with whatever you want to say to the fans and whatever you want to plug.
Thanks very much. Yeah, my latest book is called Wondrous. That's 25 true UFO accounts. Probably my most popular book is Onboard UFO Encounters. And again, I think this is an important subject. And the ET's main mission is to really wake us up. They want us to become autonomous beings, think for ourselves, reach out to them. And if you want to see a UFO, it's not hard to do. Just meditate. Reach out telepathically. They want us to grow spiritually, because that's where we're having a lot of problems. So that would be my main message. We need to allow love and truth to guide our actions and recognize that we are all one together.
Thank you for watching the Hannibal TV. Please like this video if you enjoyed it and click the subscribe button to not miss any of our latest shoot